In the frontier's silence, a man learns the past is not a place left behind. It is a patient debt that follows, always waiting for the day of its collection. The Arizona sun was a merciless coin in a bleached sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across the prairie. Dust, fine as flour, coated everything in a layer of pale brown. A lone rider, Ethan Colt, moved through the shimmering heat, his horse's hooves a slow, rhythmic beat against the baked earth. His face, hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat, was a map of wind and time. He rode with a heavy stillness, a man who had made peace with solitude, but never with the ghosts that rode beside him in the silent expanse. He was not seeking fortune, he was running from a past that had a longer memory than he did. A past he thought he had finally outrun in the quiet canyons of the north. Peace was a fragile thing. It had been shattered 3 days ago by the arrival of an old trapper, a friend who knew better than to seek him out without cause. The news was sparse, delivered in a low voice over a crackling fire. "It's the Navajo woman, Lena. The railroad men took her." Lena, mourning dove. A name that was an echo from another life, a time when Ethan still believed in things like starting over. The railroad company, a relentless machine of iron and money, wanted her people's land. They needed to carve a path through the sacred valleys, and they would not be stopped by treaties or tradition. They had taken her to ensure cooperation. Ethan stared into the flames that night, the trapper's words branding themselves onto his thoughts. He owed Lena nothing, not in the currency of the world. There was no blood debt, no sworn oath. Yet, there was something deeper, a bond forged not in violence but in quietude. He remembered evenings spent beneath a canopy of stars, her voice a soft melody as she shared the stories of her ancestors. He had spoken of his own dream then, a small ranch, a life where the only thing he had to fight was the land itself. She had listened with an understanding that went beyond words. That memory was the reason he was here. It was a matter of honor, a debt to the man he once hoped to be. Now riding south, each mile was a step back into the world he had fled. The Colt at his hip felt heavier than it had in years. The quiet confidence in his posture was a mask for the storm brewing inside him. He was no hero, and he knew it. He was just a man who had been given a reason to stop running. As the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ethan did not look for shelter. He pushed his horse onward, a solitary figure moving toward a confrontation he could no longer avoid. The world he had tried to leave behind was calling him home, and he had no choice but to answer. Wolf's Den trading post was supposed to be a pocket of life in the vast emptiness. Instead, it was a picture of silent violation. The door hung open on a single leather hinge. Overturned wagons lay in the yard, their contents, sacks of flour, bolts of cloth, tools, spilled onto the ground but largely untouched. There was no smell of smoke, no sign of a true battle. This was not the work of a desperate outlaw gang. This was cold, methodical intimidation. The silence itself was a threat, a warning left for any who might stumble upon this place. Ethan dismounted, his hand resting near the handle of his firearm, his eyes scanning every shadow. He moved through the ransacked main building, his boots crunching on scattered beans and broken glass. Behind a heavy oak counter, a faint sound, a choked sob, reached his ears. Ethan knelt, his voice low and calm. "It is all right. I mean you no harm." A small boy, no older than 10, with wide, terrified eyes, slowly emerged from his hiding place. He was clutching a wooden horse, his knuckles white. This was Sam, the orphan the post's owner, a kindly man named Elias, had taken in. The boy was trembling, but he was physically unharmed. Ethan offered him his canteen, the simple act a bridge across the chasm of fear. Sam drank, his gaze fixed on Ethan. When he finally spoke, his voice was a thin whisper. They were looking for the lady, the Navajo lady. He described the men. They did not wear the colorful shirts of cowboys or the rough garb of prospectors. They wore matching dusters, their faces grim and businesslike. They were not loud, Sam said, remembering. That was the scary part. They just took things apart until Elias told them where she went. They had forced the information from the old man and then taken Lena. mentioning a place called Devil's Anvil, a silver mine up in Bloody Canyon. Their leader had said her cooperation was essential. Ethan's jaw tightened. He helped the boy gather some food and blankets from the mess. "Elias will return, Sam. He is a tough man." He looked toward the jagged peaks of Bloody Canyon, a wound in the distant landscape. The men he sought were not just hired thugs. They were agents of a power that believed itself above the law. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You were brave to stay hidden. You are a brave man." Leaving Sam with a promise that help would come, Ethan swung back into his saddle. The mission had a name now, a destination, and it was steeped in a coldness that had nothing to do with the coming night. The trail leading to Bloody Canyon was stark and clear. The riders had made no attempt to conceal their tracks, a sign of supreme arrogance. They believed they were untouchable, that the authority of the railroad was a shield no single man could pierce. Ethan rode at a steady pace, his mind a quiet ledger of details, the number of horses, the depth of their prints in the soil. 4 riders, moving with purpose. He knew this type of man. They were not driven by greed or passion, but by cold, hard coin. They followed orders without question, and that made them more dangerous than any common outlaw. They were the instruments of another's will. He stopped where the trail crossed a shallow, muddy creek. Something caught his eye, a small object half buried in the damp earth near the water's edge. He dismounted and knelt, gently prying it free. It was a small leather pouch, no bigger than his thumb, decorated with a delicate, beaded pattern of a soaring hawk. His breath caught in his throat. It was Lena's. An amulet she had told him was a gift from her grandmother, a charm she never removed. It had not been dropped by accident. The leather thong was cut clean. She had left it for him. A sign. A silent message sent out into the wilderness. A prayer that he would be the one to find it. Holding the small pouch in his palm, the years melted away. He was no longer a weary rider on a grim mission. He was back by a hidden campfire, the scent of pinon smoke in the air. Lena was sitting across from him, her fingers weaving a basket with practiced grace. She was telling him the story of the first people, of how the world was sung into existence. He had told her of his own past, of the wrongful accusation that had made him a fugitive, a ghost drifting from one territory to the next. She had not judged him. She had simply listened, her dark eyes holding a depth of understanding that had soothed a part of his soul he thought was long dead. The memory was a sharp ache in his chest, a reminder of a peace he had only glimpsed. This pouch was not just a clue, it was a piece of that forgotten dream. He tightened his grip on it, the soft leather a tangible link to her. His resolve hardened from a sense of duty into a fierce protective fire. They had taken more than just a woman. They had taken the last, best part of his own history. He remounted, his movements sharp and decisive. The setting sun cast his long shadow before him, pointing the way toward the canyon, pointing the way toward a reckoning. He would not fail her. Bloody Canyon was aptly named. The tall, red rock walls seemed to bleed in the late afternoon sun, closing in around the trail like the jaws of a trap. Ethan's senses were on high alert, his gaze sweeping across the high ridges, searching for any unnatural shape or movement. He felt the cold touch of being watched. Then, a glint of sunlight on metal from high above. He reacted without thinking, pulling his horse hard to the side and sliding from the saddle just as the crack of a rifle echoed through the canyon. A chip of rock exploded from the spot where his head had been moments before. A warning shot. He found cover behind a cluster of massive boulders, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. He did not draw his own weapon. A firefight was what they wanted, a fight he could not win against unseen marksmen with the advantage of high ground. He peered through a crack in the rocks. He could see 2 men, silhouettes against the sky. They were waiting for him to make a move, to expose himself. But Ethan knew this land. He had spent years learning its secrets, its hidden paths and silent passages. He began to move, not toward them, but away, melting into the deep shadows at the base of the canyon wall. He circled around, his boots making no sound on the loose shale. He climbed a narrow, treacherous path he remembered from his trapping days, a goat trail hidden from the main canyon floor. He emerged behind and above them, a ghost they never knew was there. He dislodged a single, large rock with the toe of his boot. It tumbled down the cliff face, starting a small avalanche of stones and dust that crashed down near the spot where the sentries were positioned. It was not enough to harm them, but it was enough to separate one man from his partner in the ensuing confusion and cloud of dust. Ethan descended quickly, cornering the lone man as he tried to regain his footing. The man spun around, his eyes wide with shock, as he came face to face with the man he thought was pinned down below. Ethan disarmed him with a swift, practiced motion. "I have no quarrel with you," Ethan said, his voice level and cold. "But my patience is wearing thin." He held the man's gaze. "I am going to leave you your horse and your water. In return, you will tell me what is happening at Devil's Anvil." The man, broken and terrified, spoke quickly. Lena was there. They were holding her until she gave them a document. An old Spanish treaty, proof that the land belonged to her people. The railroad baron, Mr. Sterling, wanted it. Ethan stared at the mercenary, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This was not about a simple railroad track. It was about ownership, about erasing a history written on paper to make way for a future built on iron. He pushed the man back. "Ride out of this canyon and do not look back. Find the man you work for, the one they call the Dutchman. Tell him Ethan Colt is coming." He watched the man scramble onto his horse and flee, a messenger of the storm that was about to break. He knew attacking the mine alone would be a fool's errand. The Dutchman would have the place fortified, his men on high alert. He needed a plan, he needed allies. He turned his horse away from the direct path to the mine and rode west, toward the faint smudge of smoke on the horizon that marked the town of Redemption. It was a place teetering on the edge of civilization, a town caught between the old ways and the new. It had a saloon, a general store, and a sheriff's office. The law in Redemption was a man named Brody, a pragmatist who walked a fine line, trying to keep the peace between settlers, the nearby Navajo, and the encroaching interests of men like Sterling. Ethan did not know if Brody would be a friend or a foe. The law often bent to the will of money. But there was another man in Redemption, a man whose character was as solid as the granite hills. Marcus Quaid. An old rancher who had settled here decades ago. A man who believed in fairness and a person's word above all else. He and his family had carved a life from the harsh land with their own two hands. They respected the Navajo, trading with them fairly and honoring the boundaries of their lands. If there was one man in this territory who would stand for what was right, regardless of the cost, it was Marcus Quaid. Ethan's hope rested not with the badge in the town, but with the honor of the man on the ranch. As he rode, he felt the weight of Lena's leather pouch against his chest, tucked safely in his shirt pocket. It was a constant reminder of what was at stake. This was her fight, her people's legacy. But it had become his fight too. The memory of her quiet strength, her belief in a world governed by more than just power and greed, gave him purpose. He was no longer just a drifter. He was a man with a cause, riding toward a town named Redemption, hoping it would live up to its name. He would face the law first, but his true destination was the Quaid Ranch. He would need more than a firearm to win this fight. He would need allies. Ethan found Sheriff Brody in his small, dusty office, a place that smelled of stale coffee and ink. Brody was a man in his 50s, with a weary face and eyes that had seen too much. He listened to Ethan's story without interruption, his fingers steepled on his desk. When Ethan finished, the sheriff let out a long sigh. "Mr. Sterling of the Transcontinental Railroad is a very influential man, Colt. He has friends in Prescott, even in Washington. He paints a picture of progress, of jobs and prosperity, a picture many folks are eager to believe. He has taken a woman against her will," Ethan stated, his voice low. "That is a crime in any territory. And he will claim she is a guest, a consultant on matters of land rights," Brody countered, his tone laced with frustration. "He will wrap this whole affair in so much legal paper that it will take a circuit judge a year to sort it out. My hands are tied. If I ride out to that mine, he will have my badge before sundown for interfering with private business." He leaned forward. "But if a private citizen were to resolve a personal dispute and no laws were broken within my town's limits, I am a very busy man. I cannot be everywhere at once." Ethan left the sheriff's office with the unspoken permission he had hoped for. He rode through the small town to the sprawling Quaid Ranch on the outskirts. Marcus Quaid was mending a fence, his back straight despite his years. He looked up as Ethan approached, his gaze steady. He remembered Ethan. Marcus's son, Ben, a young man with his father's solid build and a fiery spirit, joined them. Ethan told his story again, this time not to a man of law, but to a man of the land. When he was done, Marcus wiped his hands on his trousers. "This is not your fight alone, Ethan," he said simply. "Sterling's railroad will devour us all if we let it. First the Navajo, then the small ranchers." Ben nodded in agreement, his hand resting on the axe he held. "What is the plan? We cannot just ride in there with guns blazing. The Dutchman has too many men." "No," Ethan agreed, looking from the determined father to the eager son. "We do not fight them on their terms. We do not need a battle. We need a rescue." He looked out toward the canyon, his mind already working, piecing together a strategy born from his knowledge of the land and his understanding of his enemy. They expect a frontal assault, a lone rider seeking vengeance. We will give them something else entirely. We will give them chaos. The plan was daring in its simplicity. The next afternoon, Marcus and Ben drove a small herd of their most cantankerous longhorns toward the entrance of Bloody Canyon. At a signal from Ethan, hidden on a high ridge, Ben fired his rifle into the air. The cattle, already agitated, stampeded directly toward the mining camp. The ensuing chaos was immediate and overwhelming. Guards who were expecting a single rider were suddenly faced with a wave of horns and hooves. Shouts and confusion filled the air as the Dutchman's men scrambled to turn the herd, their attention completely diverted from the mine itself. While the diversion was in full force, Ethan moved. He slipped down from his perch and entered the camp from the rear, a gray shadow against the red rock. He moved with an unnerving silence, bypassing the distracted guards and heading straight for the mine manager's office, a small wooden building set apart from the others. He felt a cold certainty that Lena would not be held with the common prisoners. She was too valuable. Her prison would be one of isolation, not neglect. The door was locked. A moment's work with a thin piece of steel from his saddlebag, and the lock clicked open. He found her inside. She was seated in a chair, her wrists bound to its arms, but her posture was defiant. Her dark eyes, which had been staring out the window with a mixture of anger and despair, widened in recognition when she saw him. A single, silent tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice rough. He did not waste words. He moved quickly to her side, his knife slicing through the ropes. "I knew you would come," she said, rubbing her wrists. "They did not believe me." "I am here now," he said softly. "Can you walk?" She nodded, her chin held high. "I can run." He led her out the back of the building, away from the lingering chaos of the stampede. "There is an old ventilation tunnel at the far end of the mine," she said, her voice urgent. "It opens out on the north side of the canyon. My father showed it to me when I was a child. It was their only chance." They ran, keeping to the shadows of the buildings. A few stray shots rang out behind them, fired by guards who had finally noticed something was amiss, but they were flying blind. They reached the tunnel entrance, a dark maw in the rock face, and plunged into the cool darkness, leaving the shouts and the dust of Devil's Anvil behind them. They emerged from the tunnel into the quiet of the setting sun, their clothes covered in grime, their lungs filled with clean, cool air. They were safe, for now. Marcus was waiting for them with horses at the rendezvous point. The ride back to the Quaid Ranch was silent, a shared journey of exhaustion and relief. Back in the warmth of the ranch house, with a hot meal before them, the dam of silence finally broke. Lena looked at Ethan, her eyes searching his. "The treaty," she said. "It is why they took me. It is a document from the Spanish crown, giving my ancestors this land forever. It is the only thing that stands in Sterling's way." She explained that it was her father's most sacred trust, passed down to her before he died. "I would not tell them where it is hidden," she said, her voice fierce. "I would have let them hang me first." Then her gaze softened. She reached across the table, her fingers gently touching the back of his hand. "Now you must tell me, Ethan. Why did you leave all those years ago? You disappeared like a morning mist." The question hung in the air, a ghost that had stood between them for too long. He had never told anyone the full story of his past. He finally met her eyes, the truth heavy on his tongue. "I was a deputy in the Texas Panhandle," he began, his voice low. "My partner was a corrupt man. When I discovered he was working with cattle rustlers, he framed me for a crime I did not commit. A man was killed. They put a price on my head." He looked down at his hands. "I ran. I did not want that shadow to fall on you, Lena. I could not drag you into my fight." The confession felt like lancing a wound. He had carried the shame and injustice for so long, a solitary burden. Lena did not pull her hand away. Instead, her grip tightened slightly. "Your past does not define you, Ethan. Your actions do. You came for me. That is the man I see." In that moment, the years of distance and misunderstanding vanished. It was not the rekindling of a youthful crush, but the birth of something stronger. A trust forged in hardship, a respect between two people who had seen the worst of the world and still chose to fight for the best in it. They both knew Sterling would not give up. The fight was far from over. But now, they would face it together. A few days later, a dust cloud on the horizon announced the arrival of Mr. Sterling. He did not come with a band of rough men in dusters. He arrived in a polished carriage, accompanied by 2 lawyers in city suits and a pair of grim-faced federal marshals. He had shifted his attack from brute force to the cold, sharp edge of the law. He rode into redemption not as a villain, but as a victim of theft and sabotage. Within an hour, warrants were issued. One for Lena Morning Dove, for the theft of vital corporate documents. One for Ethan Colt, for assault and obstruction of railroad business. Sheriff Brody came to the Quaid Ranch himself, his face a mask of regret. "My hands are truly tied now, Marcus," he said, holding the official papers. "This is a federal matter. The marshals have jurisdiction." The Quaid Ranch was suddenly under a legal siege. They were not prisoners, but they could not leave. Sterling had effectively trapped them, using the very laws they respected as the bars of their cage. The tension was a palpable thing, a heavy blanket that smothered the once peaceful homestead. This was a war of nerves, and Sterling was a master of the game. Sterling sent one of his lawyers to the ranch with a proposition. It was simple. Lena would turn over the Spanish treaty. In return, all charges against her, against Ethan, and against the Quaids for harboring fugitives would be dropped. "Mr. Sterling is a reasonable man," the lawyer said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "He believes in peaceful resolutions." Marcus Quaid nearly threw the man off his porch. "His peace is the peace of the graveyard," he growled. They all knew Sterling's word was worthless. The moment he had the treaty, they would have nothing left to bargain with. That night, a deep quiet fell over the ranch. Lena stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit land that was rightfully hers. Ethan came to stand beside her. "He thinks he has us trapped," she said softly. "He believes that paper is his only obstacle." Ethan watched the 2 marshals patrolling the perimeter of the ranch. "He is wrong," Ethan replied. "The paper is just a symbol. The real obstacle is our will to fight. He can try to break us with laws and threats, but he cannot take that away." He gently took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, a small, defiant gesture in the face of an overwhelming force. Sterling's final move was to call a town meeting in the Redemption Saloon. He wanted to explain the benefits of the railroad to the local ranchers and businessmen, to paint himself as a savior and Lena's people as selfish savages standing in the way of progress. It was a public performance designed to turn the entire territory against them. But Marcus Quaid had lived in these parts for 30 years. He still had friends, people who owed him favors. That night, under the cover of darkness, he arranged for Ethan and Lena to be smuggled into the back room of the saloon before the meeting began. Sterling stood before the assembled townsfolk, his voice smooth and persuasive. He spoke of jobs, of commerce, of connecting redemption to the modern world. "All that stands in our way," he said, his voice ringing with false sincerity, "is the stubbornness of a few heathens who refuse to see the future." At that moment, the doors to the back room swung open. Ethan and Lena stepped out. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Sterling's face tightened, his mask of civility slipping for just a second. He had not expected this. He had expected them to cower at the ranch. Lena walked to the front of the room. She did not raise her voice. She held up the old, yellowed parchment of the Spanish treaty. "This is not a document of stubbornness, Mr. Sterling. It is a document of promise, a promise made to my ancestors, who were here long before the first rail was laid." She spoke of her people, of their connection to the land, not as owners, but as caretakers. Her words were simple, honest, and powerful. They resonated with the ranchers in the room, men and women who understood the sacred bond between a person and their home. A man at the back of the room stood up. It was the circuit judge, a respected elder who had been passing through town and had decided to attend the meeting. He walked forward and examined the document. "This treaty is authentic," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "It is legally binding." Seeing the tide turn, Sheriff Brody acted. He placed a hand on the Dutchman's shoulder. "You and your men are under arrest for the raid on Wolf's Den." Sterling stood frozen, defeated not by a firearm, but by the truth. Later, Ethan and Lena stood on a hill overlooking the valley, the setting sun casting a golden glow. The war was over. Their future, like the land before them, was wide open and waiting to be built together.